Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar on using advocacy with our youngest students. We are super excited to be here with you today, and we're hopeful that you leave this webinar with some strategies you can implement as soon as possible, because those are our favorite types of professional development. So let's get started. Hi, my name is Lila West. This is me on the left. I am a teacher of the deaf at Clark Schools for Hearing and Speech in Northampton, Massachusetts. I work for our kindergarten to 8th grade Bridge to the Mainstream program. I have been at Clark since 2010, and while I have worked primarily in our kindergarten to 8th grade program, I have also worked with students in the mainstream from preschool through 12th grade. I'm certified as an auditory oral teacher of the deaf by Massachusetts. I'm also an elementary school, licensed as an elementary school teacher. And I have licensure as a speech language pathology assistant, and I'm nationally certified as a deaf educator.
And my name is Ashley Penna. I am currently a teacher of American Sign Language for high school levels 9 through 12. And I'm a former itinerant teacher of the deaf for Clark Mainstream Department, where I worked with students between the ages of kindergarten up through 12th grade.
And we don't have any relevant non-financial relationships to disclose, but we do want to do a shout out for the Karen Anderson book. If you guys don't have this, we would highly recommend it. It is worth every penny. And you know, I saw online it's now available as a 3-ring binder, so you can easily photocopy it. Genius.
Yeah, especially it is a very large book, and getting that in the copier definitely makes some bends in your book binding for sure.
For sure. So we are going to talk about some assessments especially that are found in her book that are not available for free online, so we weren't able to include them in your packet of handouts. But if you haven't invested in this book, we would highly recommend it. Okay, so as we get started, we just wanted to define our terms. So we borrowed this definition from rightslaw.com, and that is self-advocacy is the ability to understand and effectively communicate one's needs to other individuals. So for the purposes of this presentation, that is the definition we will use. And one thing I just wanted to point out is that when we discuss targeting advocacy with our kids, we consider it both a receptive and an expressive skill. Okay, so for part 1, we're going to talk about how important it is to start advocacy as early as possible. And Ashley and I are not researchers, and the point of the presentation is not to present research we have done, but there is research supporting starting advocacy as soon as possible. For example, students who know how to self-advocate have an important skill that supports lifelong success. Yet few children actually are taught how to understand their needs and communicate those needs to others. A child who is comfortable making choices, talking about needs, and going through the decision-making process will become a strong self-advocate. Even very young children should be building skills related to independence and self-advocacy. That's a little bit vague in terms of how young can you start. And there are definitely instances where you may come up against some non-believers, if you will. So this research by Karen Anderson helps with that. In order to make certain the student has the same advantages as peers in gaining information from the myriad of activities that make up the school day, the student must have well-developed self-advocacy skills by intermediate grades, or he will not be able to access the full educational offerings. Children in early childhood programs who are given the responsibility of charging the FM and handing it to the adult are more likely to become reliant self-advocates as compared to students not held responsible until grade 2 or later. So just to be specific and to be clear, our presentation focuses on preschoolers through 2nd graders, or students operating within that level developmentally. Okay, and in case you work for a school which requires all of your goals and benchmarks to relate back to the Common Core standards or maybe your state standards, the Common Core does support advocacy as young as kindergarten. For example, students will follow agreed upon rules for discussions, continue a conversation through multiple exchanges, ask and answer questions in order to seek help, get information, or clarify something. The next time we see advocacy skills in the Common Core is in second grade, which here again follow agreed upon rules for discussion, but also build on others' talk in conversations by linking their comments to the remarks of others. Obviously you can't do that if you've missed what someone else has said. Ask for clarification and further explanation as needed about the topics and texts under discussion that points directly to use of repair strategies. And ask and answer questions about what a speaker says in order to clarify comprehension, gather additional information, or deepen understanding of a topic or issue. So in case you run up against people who are uncertain that a child this young could be working on these skills, the Common Core does support them. Okay, part 2, where do I start? I found when I was working with kids and I needed to write advocacy goals, I don't know about you guys, but it can be a little overwhelming in terms of how to pinpoint where to begin. So Ashley's going to talk to us about some tools that she has shared with me that I found super helpful.
Okay, so considering your options, we broke this down into 3 groups, including checklist, classroom observation, and doing student interviews. So in regards to checklists with students, so giving them things like closed set, visuals, maybe acting out the situation, because a lot of the language within these checklists that we use may also need to be tailored to the student that you're working with. So with that, taking these checklists and bringing them to the teacher, so maybe having one that's done in the classroom that the teacher can fill out, and then maybe one that you are giving to the student during an observation, and as well as the parents. So is what the child doing in the one-to-one setting or in the classroom setting, is that being carried over at home? So are these parents taking on the routines that you're trying to target in the classroom and in these one-to-one settings? So with that, classroom observations always being data-driven, which we can then take to formulate IEP goals, targeting specific objectives and making sure that they're timed, so a behavior over a certain period of time. And last would be a student interview, so considering the language level, using visual aids, making sure that you're in the appropriate setting, is there distractions, and this would be a good time to then notice trends maybe during a consult with the teacher to see if these are happening in your one-to-one setting versus in the classroom. And using these responses from the student interview and taking them and putting them right into your reports, and something that maybe you can share at a yearly IEP meeting. Okay, so the first checklist is the SED. It can be used for students as young as kindergarten, and this is one of the checklists, unfortunately, that is not available online and is from the Karen Anderson book. It provides a great baseline performance and really helps target those passive skills and monitoring skills over time. So if you do the SED repeatedly, it's a good one to really track their communication repair strategies and their self-advocacy in the classroom. So I've used it a lot and dated it if it's was a kiddo that I would see like once a month to see where they are. And there's also a section that I'd like to complete with a classroom teacher. So that would be a good topic to talk about when you have those monthly consults, or, you know, an hour every 3 months kind of thing. So I like this one because it shows the strengths that they might struggle with their communication styles, and also shows the communication styles that may work best, that you can then take and use it as a tool and a strategy maybe to help implement for his classroom teacher, or picking a teacher for the next year that can implement these strategies within the classroom. And so here's a picture of the SED. It's broken down to, into independent as well as communication repair, which I was talking about earlier. and it's totally doable. It's broken down to never, rare, occasionally, sometimes, often. So again, this is something that there was ones, if you don't see the student a whole lot, that you'll need to chat with the classroom teacher who spends the most time with that student about. So the next one that I'm going to chat about is the Audiology Self-Advocacy Checklist. This one's available for free on the PhoNAC website, and it's also available on the Karen Anderson website as well.
And it should be included in your packet of handouts.
Yes.
Too. So grab that.
So this one that we're looking at that you have is the elementary school version, but there's also a middle school and high school version that are available.
Yeah, we'll click the link. Here we go.
Great. So this one gives a little, it's only one page, so it gives pretty broad examples compared to other ones that I'll talk to you about. So describes something like number 11 describes how hearing aid technology helps improve communication in different situations, to things that are maybe a little bit more specific, so identifying basic parts such as the transmitter versus the receiver, the attachment to the audio shoes, and charging. There's also gives you a place to date this for when you can monitor it. It definitely is user-friendly. It doesn't really add that professional lingo. You'd be able to give this to a kindergarten teacher and give them a quick run-through, and they would probably be able to follow along with it. There's a couple words like interference and intermittent sounds and static, but definitely user-friendly, and it's only one page, so if you were to give it to a teacher or a nurse, that they wouldn't be overwhelmed by it. So that is the Audiology Self-Advocacy Checklist for elementary schools. And so next is the Life R. There are 2 Life Rs that are available for free on the Karen Anderson website to download in the PDF. And there's also a guiding questions list that is in the Karen Anderson book. So looking at the Life R, the first part is the teacher version. So with that, it's 2 pages, and there are pre and post-test questions. So there's 6 questions that really just kind of get the student's brain going, and just kind of having a conversation about, you know, what's going on in the classroom. So how do you know when the teacher did not hear or understand the teacher completely? What is the best description of the teacher's location in the room? And these are things that I've definitely had to modify and act out to the student depending on their age level. So, you know, when Mrs. Such and Such is talking to you, does she stand here? Does she talk with her hand over her mouth? Is she, you know, near this heater or by, you know, the back of the room and is trying to talk to you at the front of the room? And the same thing about, you know, describing your classroom location. So where do you sit in the class? Do you sit in the front row? Are you more towards the back? And acting out where the teacher is versus where the student is. So with the student one, after these 6 questions, there's also post questions where they give you 15 different listening situations, and you're to star them based on a 1 through 3 rating. And I have done this. We do this every year with my students. Yeah, so right here.
Okay, sorry.
So with the little guys, I would make a little piece of construction paper, and I would cut out 3 little stars, and they would manually put down each star for them.
Sounds fun.
And with some of the older kids, so like I said, I've done this every year at the end of the year to share at IEP meetings. I made little pictures of stars and put them on popsicle sticks so that they were able to put up 1, 2, or 3 because they really liked doing it, and they understood what it was because we've done this for, you know, 2, 3 years by then at that point.
Mm-hmm. So rather than just handing this to the student to fill out, you adapt it to be a more interactive, activity-based.
Yeah, especially, you know, if we're talking about like a 2nd grader and you give him, you know, this worksheet to draw the stars, especially looking how tiny the spaces that they give.
Yeah.
So either they draw it, I've done it with wipe off boards, so there's definitely things that you could do to kind of make it a fun activity. But the thing that I like about this is I really like the questions that kind of prompt the student to think about their hearing loss and think about listening situations and things that worked and things that are maybe hard for them in the classroom. So it really gets them to think about their listening settings. So that's the Life R. And so what I just talked to you about are assessments that I would use regularly, and I would use them just the way that they are.
Sort of your favorite list?
Yes, for sure. So the ones that I'm going to talk to you about next are either are ones that I've kind of taken from and made my own. So there's a lot of really good things, and there's a lot of things that maybe wouldn't apply for that student, and a lot of them maybe a little overwhelming. The ones that I spoke to you about are a good go-to to, just give to a teacher or to bring up and talk about at a consult, or to then use and then make your own IEP goals out of. These other ones I kind of pick and find what works best for the student.
Rather than using it in total.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Guide to Self-Advocacy Skill Development is in your folder. It targets students from preschool to grade 4, and so it's an order in which to approach things when working with the student. So it may not match developmentally, but it's with what is next with their current performance. It's a great tool to use maybe if you're looking at their IEP goals for next year, and then what to look for even when observing with a student. So the thing that I like about this is that she gives, this is a Karen Anderson observation list, and so she gives the grade that these things are happening at, and then also gives activities to do within those. So demonstrates ability to perform basic troubleshooting when hearing device malfunctions. So things pretty broad like that, up to things that are specific. So can request that an FM microphone be passed and to remind the teacher to turn on the microphone, and recognizing interference noise that occurs in the learning environment. So demonstrating by closing the classroom door, moving away from noise, or requesting reduction in noise. So it gives specific examples that you can then tie to their grade level. So that's the Guide to Self-Advocacy, and it is in your handout packet.
And that's a great one to find IEP goal ideas or benchmark ideas. You can
and especially, you can look the grades forward and say where you think that you want to be with that student.
You can also use it to find holes. I found kids that I work with sort of have holes across the board because they have hearing loss, but that exists in advocacy skills as well. So you can look back and see if they're missing anything.
So next is the SEAM. The SEAM is also available here linked and on the Karen Anderson website. This one is similar to the guide to the link of the ASAC on the PHONAC website, which was the second one that we talked about. It's the advocacy self-checklist, sorry. And this one also includes things like Ling sound checklists and adult portions to it. So the adult monitors the device every 2 weeks. The adult uses the Ling sound checklist 2 days per week. So those are things that I don't typically use, but they're things that I have taken and made into my own personal checklists. So things like the student's remembers to use the dry aid kit at the end of the school day. The student performs a battery check independently. So there's a lot of things that I do take from that audiology self-advocacy checklist that I reviewed, but there's a couple good ones in here that I have used to make my own. So that's the SEAM. It's used I use it across teaching teams to gather data. So if your kiddo has special ed or is then going to speech or is pulled out for this, that it can kind of keep you and the other members on the teaching team kind of on the same page. And the goal with this obviously is to the student to use their technology independently, and so then to see where those gaps are and then how to take those steps when a situation does arise.
Cool. The ACCAT.
Yes, so the ACCAT can be a little bit overwhelming. So it's divided into student, speech and language, a teacher of the deaf, and then general education teachers. There's a lot of really good stuff, I feel, in the ADCAT. So it's used to gain information across areas. A big one is to share all of this pages and pages of data that you're going to gather at IEP meetings. It's super duper structured, and the student section has a portion for them to reflect on their own areas and their accommodations, and teacher and peer communication, and the classroom environment. So it's kind of getting areas from all the checklists that I've talked about into one. It's not one that you would really do with your student one-to-one, except that last student portion of it, but it's something that would need to be done in observations and a consult with the classroom teacher for sure.
That one, unfortunately, is not available in your packet.
It's in the Karen Anderson book.
Right.
And so the last one that I'm going to talk to you about is the observational record of behavior. So this is a really great one that I have taken and I have kind of made it my own. I listed here on the PowerPoint that there was a limited area for comments. They don't give you a whole lot of space, especially if you're taking tallies on your student doing something in the classroom, if you're doing an observation, and there's just not a whole lot of room to write. So I have taken this one and added it to my checklists. And so it talks about areas including advocacy, access, teacher skills, classroom acoustics, and peer interaction. It's only one page, which is nice. I have a whole bunch of these copies made so that if I can sneak into a classroom, I can just bring that one in me, and it will prompt me to pay attention to the heater next to me, or count how many times my student's raising his hand, and just maybe things that I'm just kind of programmed to follow this observational record because I use it so many times, and it hits big ones and it hits pretty specific ones too, which I like.
Cool. Okay, so here's an example of one that I made up. I had a kiddo who didn't really fit into any of those worksheets. You know, I sort of used everything that Ashley has just talked about to pinpoint areas that I thought he was weak in, or areas I wasn't sure about, skills I hadn't seen demonstrated, but maybe that's because I hadn't been looking for them specifically. So this is an example. It's in your packet. Hopefully it will open. We've been having a little trouble with that. But I gave it to his classroom teacher and to his parents, who happened to live in different homes, just to be sure that the skills we were looking at were across the board. So these were things that he was working on. So we used this as just a jumping off point. It gets really specific. This one's for the teachers. We used this as a jumping off point to write IEP benchmarks to target our one-on-one therapy. And then we also kept a copy in his file so that we could document, this is the one for his parents, we could document his skills over time. So sometimes I might use this, you know, to highlight for the teacher, these are the ones we're working on, so reporting his dead batteries immediately. And then maybe the next term we're working on changing his batteries independently. Depending on where the kid is at that moment, you can also use it to talk to teachers about what you're looking for specifically. It is a little overwhelming when you give it to the teacher initially. I found, you know, give them time definitely to fill it out. But then going from there, I would pick out specific skills that we were going to focus on. So that's just one example of using those resources that Ashley just shared to create something for yourself or for your specific kid. So here we brainstormed, when we did this presentation live, we had a little interactive discussion here. So if you would like to have a moment to turn and talk to someone you're with about what a strong advocate would look like, these are the major parts that we identified for a child who is second grade or younger. So that would be doing, excuse me, the morning listening check routine, reporting when there's issues, communicating to adults when a situation with equipment arises, talking to their peers. All of these skills, or most of them at least, we're going to hit in terms of some suggestion activities later on in the presentation, I think. Understanding their own hearing loss at a basic level, using repair strategies, asking for clarification, taking action when the microphone is muted or unmuted inappropriately, bringing their own equipment to different places within the school, moving away from distracting noise, and taking care of dead batteries and learning what the different beeps on their hearing aid mean. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. We've definitely forgotten something, I'm sure. Okay, so next we're going to talk about how to take those assessments and write IEP goals and benchmarks that target this specifically. I have found in my own practice, I see kids one-on-one for speech and language development, and it can be really easy and overwhelming to think about all the things that a kid needs to learn in terms of academics and language and speech and listening. But then I try to bring it back to these IEP benchmarks are going to be what's most important for helping the student know how to learn. You know, he can't access the curriculum after, going forward if he can't advocate. So there's a strong argument for including these in the IEP. So first we're going to consider the topic, and from here on out we kind of break our skills into 3 areas, those being equipment, personal hearing loss, and communication. Then we're going to think about how it's going to be measured. So for example, are we going to look at it in the classroom? Are we going to look for it in the one-on-one setting? Are we going to document it on a checklist? How are we going to measure it? And then not only where will it be measured, but where is it going to be targeted at as well? So what sort of level is the student at? Are we still practicing skills in a one-on-one setting? Are we implementing them in the classroom? Are we looking for parents to see them generalized outside of the classroom in everyday life? So in your packet, we have some examples, which we'll find down here, right here. Okay. So these are some that Ashley and I have used in the past. Of course, you would tailor them to meet your students specifically. And they can be as basic. They sort of follow a progression of basic skills to more complex skills in terms of the benchmarks. And these are also broken up for equipment, personal hearing loss, and communication. So at a very basic level, it would be Leo, for example, will change his hearing aid batteries, perform basic cleaning tasks, and regularly blow moisture out of his tubes with decreased adult support in, and then however you want to measure that. Are you going to do it within observations? Is there some way you can have a teacher's aide or the classroom teacher keep track on a daily basis? Are you looking more generally per marking period if it's a kiddo you just consult on? Depending on where the kid is in that skill. Whereas down here at the bottom, we have Leo will rehearse how to show and explain quickly and succinctly to unfamiliar adults and peers how and why to use the FM transmitter and or pass-around microphone. Information and demonstration will be accurate and less than a minute long in 9 out of 10 attempts. And that one, if you want it to be more specific, we'll practice in a one-on-one setting, and then maybe next time around you're looking for it in the classroom. That one's a harder one to look for because you're not going to be there necessarily when there's a sub. So that's a way to practice a skill when you can't be there to observe it. And here we have, participate in an introduction to hearing loss, for his teachers and peers by assisting an adult in a presentation, demonstrating use of listening equipment, and or answering questions. That's sort of a one-time met, didn't meet type of benchmark. Or here we have promptly and politely seek to fix misuse of listening equipment. So discussing how to do that in a one-on-one setting, and to do so successfully when sabotaged in 4 out of 5 observations. So in that case, you might have to talk to the classroom teacher and ask her to purposely sabotage so you can see what the student would do. And then down here we have more communication benchmarks. Here again, it's really important to think about where he's using these skills and at what level he's already at, so that you're not sort of repeating things he's already successful at. So obviously these are not a comprehensive list, but they are some that we have used in the past, and please feel free to take them and personalize them as you see fit. Okay, so now we're going to talk about all of the potential pitfalls that you could run into, or that we have run into in the past, right, Ash?
For sure.
I kind of love this part.
Okay, so if you have a student that has a short attention span and is forgetful, which we are dealing with early in elementary school, I'm sure all of you are nodding your head right now, and is also easily embarrassed or shy. So trying things like adding visuals, and more visuals. Getting that entire class involved, creating some sort of reward system, so whether it's when they pass the microphone around that they get a star on their chart, or they get to bring a friend to their next one-to-one session, which leads to the next bullet of bringing a friend as a reward. So making sure that that student is in order, has task after task ready to keep that attention span focused, and implementing what appeals to them within their session.
Mm-hmm. I'm a big one on getting as many kids involved as possible, which I'll talk a little bit more about later too. But I found that in the early grades, differences between students are exciting, and they make students curious, and they like finding them and learning more about one another. There's not a stigma attached yet. So in terms of having as many kids as possible who know that, Leo can't leave school with his receivers on, that just increases your chances. Now you have 25 people looking for that.
Leo, did you take those receivers off before we go on the bus?
Yeah, remember they cost a lot of money. That's a big one. Kids love to talk about how much they cost.
And then if you lose something on the playground, you have a whole team of 20 students that know what that piece looks like when they're going through wood chips to find it.
Yes. And in terms of the visuals, I think sometimes people get bogged down in how that has to look. I've had kids, if their attention span is that short, maybe they just have a little card on their desk for the one thing that they are trying to remember to do. So they have a card on their desk that has a picture of a basketball and the teacher's transmitter, and that's to remind them that they have to bring the transmitter to PE. Or just something as simple as that. I've also found that those visuals often work for the teacher too, and it's a nice way to have the teacher use them without telling the teacher, this is for you. This is for the kid.
Okay, so if you have a parent that is reluctant to allow their child more freedom, or the parent that overcompensates for the child, so making sure that you share the research with the parent as well as those other members of the teaching teams that you're on, and making sure that just everyone's on the same page. So communicating frequently the level of success the child is having. So I feel like you can never over-communicate with a parent, because if a situation arises, that they would always be in the know, and that they at least know that what you're working towards.
And that also builds a level of trust, so that if you say the kid can handle it and you've developed that relationship with the parents, they're more likely to give it a shot.
So being clear in the ways to help at home, so having carryover. If you're targeting this in your advocacy session and you want to see if it's being carried over at home, making sure that there's that communication, and then maybe sending home that checklist that Lila made for the parents, and then that information could be shared within the teams as well. So also finding compromise in tasks expected of the child. So starting small and building bigger. So again, making sure that you have that trust with that parent, that they're able to trust you and going above and working towards these goals. And also asking parents which goals that they would like to be incorporated. What would they like to see their child achieve by the end of the marking period or semester, or on their maybe next year's IEP.
And I wanted to share on this one just sort of a personal experience I had. I was working with a kindergartner who was wearing hearing aids. They were fairly new to him, actually. And I sent home that checklist, and one of the things was, does he change his batteries at home? And his mother told me no, because she thought that he would probably swallow them. And I was alarmed to hear this, because I'd been having him change his batteries at school, and I was thinking to myself, well, is that a real, problem that has happened? Like, has he done that before? And she said, well, no, but they're just so small that maybe he would. So she was uncomfortable thinking that he would change his batteries at school. So in that case, we sort of found a compromise. So for the first month, he would, quote, help the teacher. Maybe not the first month, but the first few weeks, he would help the teacher, quote unquote, change the batteries. And then the teacher would watch him change the batteries. And every time, every week that he was able to successfully do that, just letting the mom know that, he's able to do this. Now we're ready to bump him up to the next level. That was the same mom who wrote in the comment section of that checklist that she would like for us to work on having him identify times where he might need to take his hearing aids out. This is a little boy who liked to roll down hills and wrestle with his siblings and, run and jump in the pool. And she wanted us to work on identifying times where he would need to, quote, protect his hearing aids, which was a goal I had never thought of working on before, but one I was happy to do. So in terms of, I think you have to take it where the parent is. Not every parent is ready to read all the research on self-advocacy, but if you can be really specific and not overwhelm them with what we're working on, I've found them to be more receptive and open to it.
And you can't just assume things like with the batteries. Oh, he's doing them here in school, no problem. And there he is at home not being able to change them because the mom's scared that he's going to swallow them.
Right. And it sends a mixed message to him, too. Like, at school, I'm responsible.
Yeah, I do this, no problem.
At home, I don't have to be.
Yeah. So lastly would be the teachers and staff that provide too much support and having all of those cooks in the kitchen at once. So like I've said before, sharing the research across teaching teams. Also being clear within expectations, so avoiding those lingos. So I touched upon this about some of the checklists that I've used. So if you're giving it to a special ed teacher that maybe is not aware of intermittent sounds and what that means, so maybe rephrasing it or talking to the teacher about it beforehand. Adding visuals, which we've talked about, and collecting a comprehensive list of every adult that will be in contact in the school day. So either directly or indirectly. So something like the janitors, if the student has lost a piece of their cochlear implant or maybe their receiver, that they know what it looks like. So maybe when they're closing at 7 o'clock and sweeping, that they're keeping their eye out. Or if maybe make a friend with a custodian that this heater's making a lot of noise, that maybe they can turn it off for you, which I've had to do before. So did you want to say something?
No, I was just giggling at making a friend with a janitor because that's really your first move in a school.
Yeah, for sure. So communicating frequently. I know that when I was working with students, making sure, I know it's a little different for when they're younger, but tying what they're doing into their science lesson and then making an activity out of it, whatever if they're researching fairy tales in the 3rd grade, to maybe tie that into your lesson as well. And so assigning specific tasks to within these teachers, maybe something that they're going to look for that you would like them to monitor, because if you see them only an hour a week, you're not going to be there all the time to know all of these things that are being targeted, especially when it's in regards to advocacy.
And also, too, in terms of, if there's a classroom teacher and a classroom aide and there's the nurse, so just assigning who is going to do the listening check and then who's the backup person, because otherwise it can turn into every adult assumes another adult did it and things can fall through the cracks.
And if there's a substitute one day, and just having that student following the routine and the structured lay of what the school day is like.
And also sharing expectations with everyone. So, the classroom teacher has the student carry the transmitter to the PE teacher. Maybe the PE teacher doesn't know that that's an expectation, so then she carries it back. And then the student is left confused. So that's just another example of just being really specific in your communication. So not just, we're trying to build his advocacy skills. No, we want him to carry the transmitter. Done. We want him to tell you if it's muted. Done.
Or if you have the student that would say, I don't have to use the FM during PE, something like that. But being all on the same page that, yes, this needs to be used during PE, or yes, this needs to be used during music class.
Yep. Oh, this is my favorite part. I'm so excited for this. So now we're going to talk more about things that we have tried that have worked well for us and hopefully will work well for you in some way, shape, or form. So we're going to jump right into that. Okay, so these are just some really basic classroom reminders. First we're going to talk about equipment and personal hearing loss. So on the left is just it's almost embarrassingly simple, but my one student and his teacher would constantly forget to charge the FMs at the end of the day, or to make sure that the transmitter was with them on their way to music or art, and music and art were on the other side of the school, so then someone would have to run back. So anyway, the teacher and the student just had to touch the FM sign on their way out the door. It was also a reminder for the 20 other kids in the class to be on the lookout for the FM. And on the right is an example of a visual checklist that my student used in the morning, and then we had another one for when she came to one-on-one time. And this is a student who couldn't read, a beginning kindergartner who was a few years delayed. So she had the visuals. So she had to check that each hearing aid was working, that it was clean, that she had her FMs on, and that she had sunk in. And she continues to use this today, and it's been a great help for her.
And those visual checklists I've put them in cubbies, in lockers, I've put them at listening stations, and this is the one that Lila made, and if you notice, she put it in a sheet protector so that the student's able to get that satisfaction of checking off each box, so really being a part of it rather than just, yep, done, but taking the time to check it and giving them a role within the checklist.
Yeah, and that fostered independence too, because she was always watching teachers using checklists and listening checks and all of that. So this gave her that ownership over it. This is another example of one that Ash made, right?
Yeah, I made this one for a cubby, I believe, was the first one. So breaking it down between a morning, afternoon, and some things that we would only do on Fridays. This one was actually for the nurse's office, now that I'm thinking about it. So a morning routine, something like putting on your receivers, doing a listening check, sneaking into it. In addition to just the checks, I also put pictures of them too. An afternoon routine, so taking off your receivers, making sure that that's charged. And then some weekly Friday ones that sometimes we could forget about is just, let me just check how many batteries I have. Maybe let me check the colors within my dry aid kit. So things like that. That don't need to be a part of your everyday routine, but they get excited for Fridays, because then they get to stay with me for a little bit longer.
So in terms of building vocabulary, we use a ton of visuals. The one on the left is one that we made to talk about the pathway of sound and the basic parts of how we hear. So they used a closed set to label the different parts before, if there's typical hearing, before an implant. And then we would, quote, do surgery and put the implant in and then follow the pathway of sound and just talk about how it's different. And it allows the pictures allow the student better access to a pretty hard to understand concept, or sort of non-visual concept. And then you made the one on the right. Was that for a class presentation?
So the visual on the right was for a substitute binder that I made with my first grader. Whenever you give a first grader an iPad to take a picture, it's always the hit of the week. So she took off her hearing aids, and we added some of that awesome vocabulary. So her battery door, the ear mold, the connector tube, the volume button. Not so much that the substitute knows what they are, but so that she's using that language. And if something's wrong when I'm not there, she can go to her point person, which was a speech pathologist, and say, oh, I think I have a crack in my connector tube, or my ear mold's not fitting and it's making a lot of noise. So prompting them to really use those vocabulary. So she just wrote a little blurb. So there's a lot of different parts to my hearing aid. I wear them at school and at home. I don't wear them in noisy places. When I grow, I need to get bigger ones. And I can pick a color I want and make them too. So next was an activity that I did with a student where every season we would write a newsletter to the specials teachers so that we were kind of all on the same page. This was from a 3rd grade student, and one of her IEP goals was sequencing, so we sequenced and we advocated and we wrote about the audiologist in one lesson. So she was able to talk about her audiogram and teach her teachers about what an audiogram looks like, and really just owned it.
Anytime a kid can teach a teacher, it's going to be a hit.
Yeah, for sure. So we reviewed things like pitch and really high sounds. I actually cut out a bunch of clip art pictures of things like a high bird, or a lawnmower for something really loud, and maybe some leaves pictures for something that's really quiet. And we made our own audiogram that we just pasted the pictures to, so that she would get an idea of, oh, well, birds are really high, but this sound of an airplane can be really low. So that was with my 3rd grader. And then to the right, I made an audiogram with my kindergarten. She was in kindergarten, and we talked about high and low pitch, and we also did that matching game that I was talking to you about. And she really did a great job, and she wanted to make her own colors. This was totally her doing, about really quiet and then becoming orange and then making really loud sounds yellow, and the same thing with really low to really high sounds. We definitely got in trouble in the library that day for making really high pitched sounds and really low, deep sounds, for sure.
That's fun. And in terms of, this letter on the left is from a 3rd grade student, but there's definitely ways you could tailor that to be working with a younger student, having them dictate or scribing for them, asking them leading questions, filling in blanks. So for all of these activities, there's, please feel free to think creatively about how to tailor them.
Giving them sentence starters, or maybe even set up, with this activity, with this student, we just talked first about, like, what do you do first? And she's like, oh, well, I tell them my name, and then I wait in the waiting room, and then Dr. Julie comes and gets me. And so, but I just let her talk out all of it, and then we talked about it, and then we started typing, which is always, again, a hit in 2nd and 3rd grade.
The one in the middle, we used with some kids when we were trying to talk about why your hearing aids are important. We had some kids who weren't convinced that, they actually needed to be wearing their hearing aids. So in that one, we graphed what they can hear, everything below the line kind of thing. What you can hear without your hearing aids, and the line's pretty low. And then we graph where the hearing aids come in. And so then look at all the things that you can hear when we add the hearing aids. You may not realize that you're missing out on these sounds, but the audiogram is a pictorial way to look at that.
So this is a class presentation that I did with my second grade students. So going into this, I had made the headings for each of the slides that I wanted to make sure that we talked about. So again, this is something that you can tweak for your kindergartner versus your third grader. So some things that are helpful to me, I have done this. This student was able to think of these herself, but I've done this with a first grader where I gave them a list and I've acted them out, or I've talked to them about them and they gave me the thumbs up or thumbs down, or maybe we used the stars and these are what I took from filling out the life R from them the past year, and then taking those to kind of get their brains going and thinking about their hearing loss and thinking about those tough listening situations. Down to things like technology, like the pass-around microphone and the sound tower.
And then she shared this with her classmates at the beginning of the year.
So this was a student that one of her IEP goals was to present on her hearing loss. So we did this with her class, and then we also made handouts for her special teachers.
Cool. This is another example of a similar situation with my kindergartner. We made a book rather than a presentation. So he got to take all the pictures, he dictated, and then filled in some of the words for the text. And the idea was that he would read the book, or maybe not read it all because he was a beginning kindergartner, but he would help me read the book to his classmates. And at first he was not at all enthusiastic about that, and it took a lot of convincing for him to sit next to me. But then his classmates were so excited to see a book about him, and then the book was available afterwards in the classroom library.
It's always a hit then.
Huge hit. Oh my goodness. He owned it. He wanted to hold the book. He tried to read all of it. He answered the questions about the pictures. And then we used this the following year. I happened to have him again on my caseload. And then we were able to, we had a really good jumping off point. We could keep some pages that were still appropriate. We tweaked other pages. He looked much older being a first grader and not a kindergartner. So obviously we had to have a new title page.
And maybe he got new ear molds and wanted to show off the new ear molds.
For sure.
Because I don't have the clear ones anymore. Now I have camouflage blue ones. So They need to be in there.
Obviously. And also we were able to incorporate some questions that his peers had. So we had like an FAQ section. So it was a nice way to sort of grow with the student each year.
Yeah, that FAQ page is always great. I've added that, and especially if there's a piece like for the substitute too, are always good things to have in a book.
So in this one, we were talking about noise sources, and we were having a hard time coming up with them in sort of an open set situation, just off the tops of our heads. And so we went around and took pictures of the classroom when it was empty conveniently. And then within a sheet protector, he had to circle things in the classroom that were loud. So the door to the playground, or the small group section, the bathroom, the hallway to the bathroom. And then this led into sort of problem solving. So what could you do if you were sitting near the door to the bathroom hallway? You could ask to shut it. What could you do if you're sitting near the fan, or if the door to the hallway is open? This also led to a great discussion about announcements. He didn't realize on the first day of school that everybody else was hearing the announcement, why everyone else was standing up at the same time. So talking about what he was going to do in those instances. So this was an activity that just needed a visual, just needed a closed set to talk about noise sources and problem solving in the classroom. It was also great for the teacher too, just to be to share with the teacher that we've done this activity and here's our plan for when these things cause noise.
And I feel like this is a great thing to kind of just have on file with the student, because there's so many times where if I needed to talk about listening situations or talk about noise or problems when listening, that you'll ask them these questions and they know about the sources and about what tricky listening situations, that this just kind of reintroduces it to them and say, oh yeah, so like those announcements, remember? And then like a jumping off point for it, because you've already done all the work already talking about it, but just kind of get their brain going about listening situations again, especially with those little kiddos.
That's a good point. They also might not know the name of everything in the classroom. He didn't know the name for announcements or the speaker. And with our kids, especially, they may have vocabulary gaps or they just aren't able to express it as well. So this provides a nice opportunity to talk about the vocabulary involved as well.
Okay, so this was another page taken from the student that I made the book with earlier. So having them actually act out appropriate ways to wear the microphone is great, and maybe having them listen to it. So maybe I can wear it the right way versus the wrong way, and then so maybe we're able to reflect on it, or maybe they have their peer listen to it, and so that then when maybe you have a microphone that's on a ruler that you've passed, and then the student would be able to say, oh, well, like for Leo, that really makes a bad noise in his ear, and when you twist that cord, it's not going to sound good. So really having your student own it, and anytime I feel that they're able to be the teacher and wear the microphone's always a success too, and it gives them that visual, and the other students in the classroom, if they're able to look at these books, the opportunity to say to the teacher, like, oh, hey, Mrs. Smith, like, that clip is in your scarf, and, like, Leo's going to have a hard time with that. Like, you should move it like this.
Mm-hmm. And I find that kids love to practice doing it the wrong way. Like, they think that that's so silly, but it gives them, just to talk to them about, well, the microphone has to be close. Well, for some of our kids, unless you demonstrate what it looks like to have the microphone wrong, they're not necessarily going to make that leap.
Because it can be kind of scary telling a teacher, and the more that you talk about it and maybe are a little silly with it, and it's, on top of your shoulder, that it's not a big deal if I ask them to just reposition it, kind of thing.
So this student was older than second grade, but I had to share it because I love it. And he was working on troubleshooting. And this started out as a simple if-then note card. So I provided the problem because if you were to ask him, his hearing aids never have any problems, and he would never need to troubleshoot. So if the problem is FM, the FM has static, then the solution could be. And we were just going to make simple note cards. But he's really artistic, and he wanted to draw a visual, and then he turned it into monsters instead of himself. So in this instance, for every problem that I presented, he had to come up with 3 solutions that he would try. And he created this book, and he had a copy in his desk. There were multiple pages, and if a new problem came up, then we would add a page to the book. But he had a copy in his desk that he could consult if a problem came up, and he actually would use it too for his classmates. He's one of our in-house kids where there's a classroom of hearing impaired students, and if one of his friends was having a problem, they could consult the Monsters Guide to Troubleshooting. But then we found that after a while he didn't really need to consult it because he'd sort of just absorbed all of the information in it. So in terms of using it with a younger student, you could have a closed set of visuals. You could keep it shorter to just one solution. So if this is the problem, which of these pictures are you going to try to use to solve the problem? And anytime, like Ashley had mentioned before, that you can pull in their own personal interests, in this case drawing monsters, the more likely they are to take ownership of it and to remember it, and the more successful it's going to be.
And most of the time it's probably going to be a big help for teachers too, because a lot of times they'll be like, oh, like something's wrong with, I think that's silver peas, and if you're able to implement an activity that you do with your student that has that vocabulary and troubleshooting in it, that is prompting them to use that language, it can then help out the teacher as well.
Absolutely. So with one of my mainstream kids, we had a Bring a Friend Friday, and he thought that this was just, his reward for having worked hard all week. But it was also to implement more peer education, like I had said before, I was super big on. So every time a student came to visit us in speech, they would have a chance to listen to the hearing aid through the stethoscope. And then we would have a discussion about how loud that was. And so then we know that without the hearing aid, our friend can't hear, sounds very loudly. He really needs us to learn. And then we would sync into the FM system, and it was always a huge hit to pass a secret signal through the door. but it was also providing that education of how important it was. You know, when you have a pass or a microphone and even the teacher's transmitter, it's hard as a typically hearing person to be reminded of how important it is because we're not receiving a direct feedback. So just experiencing that for themselves helps them understand, and even really little kids can get how important it is for that student to have that technology. And then how Ashley mentioned earlier, you know, maybe you have a pass or a microphone that has the wire on the end that transmits the signal. So then you can sink in and you can play with that and have the student listen to how awful that sounds. And then you have, you know, we did this every week, so slowly we built up this little team of students who would be more than happy to correct the misuse of it, or just, and then that would also lead us into how do we do it in a friendly voice? How do we ask someone to fix the use of the equipment? One of our friends also happened to have a lot of little mamas in his class who were more than happy. It almost became a competition to be the first one to remind the teacher to use the pass-around mic, which encouraged our student who wasn't super enthusiastic in bringing attention to it. It became a little bit more competitive, and when the other kids started thinking it was cool to advocate for its use, then he was more likely to advocate for its use too. So that just sort of spread. In terms of an FM buddy classroom job, I find that if we can normalize the use of the technology as much as possible, then it's going to be successful not only that year, but in the future too. If it just becomes part of the classroom routine, then that's where you're going to find the most success.
Yeah, or put it on your job list. If you have,
Yeah.
you know, a line leader, you have an FM buddy, things like that.
Yep, absolutely. And then I think you were the one that told me about the quiet hand signal, if the microphone was muted rather than interrupting class.
Yeah, so I had a student who would use 1 for the bathroom, 2 for a water, that's what the whole class used, and then she would just put 3 up if there was a mute. So rather than having to go over to the teacher, or this was her way to be a little bit more discreet about it and to just put a 3 up. And like Lila was saying, everybody in the class then knew about it. And maybe if a student who he was talking to, if the teacher was talking to at the time, saw my student raising her hand with a 3, maybe they could say, oh, hey, Mr. Davis, such and such is keeping the 3 up. And then so, oh, okay.
And that would just be a reminder to mute the microphone because he hadn't, or to unmute it if it was still muted.
Mm-hmm.
And this picture on the bottom is of a classroom that didn't have a pass-around mic, so the transmitter is inside that cup with a microphone clipped to the top of it. And so it just became a class rule, which is a great rule in general, to only have one speaker at a time, but you also had to be holding the micro cup. So that's just another example of sort of normalizing the best practices for the hearing impaired kid. So, for strategies to target communication, the Who's Who was my suggestion. We found, so our students in our K-8 program have their academic classes with a teacher of the deaf, but they go to their specials, which is PE, art, music, library, lunch and recess, with their typically hearing kids, with their typically hearing peers. And we found that they were going an entire school year without really learning any of the names of the other students, and they considered them their friends, and they knew other things about them, and they played with them regularly, but names were really hard. And when we thought more about that, that totally made sense, because maybe on the first day you went over names, but after that, if a hearing person misses someone's name, then they're going to sort of wait for someone else to use that name.
Say it, yeah.
Or maybe they'll ask once, but they're just going to wait and listen, and our kids aren't going to do that. So we made a challenge of it where we had a copy of the class picture, and our students, you know, different kids would have a different goal, but by the end of the week, I'm going to be able to name all the boys, or in 2 weeks, I'm going to name all of the kids. Or if they came in and could talk about one of their friends and use his or her name, then they got a point towards whatever sort of challenge that you had created with them. We also turned it into a Guess Who board where we would pick a student and then have to ask clues about them. So just a way to, in that case, the students sort of guided our instruction because we noticed this was something that they were really struggling with, that was sort of a life skill that they needed. So we turned it into a game.
So the next two activities that I created to target communication is the teacher report card, which I made. This one was for a 5th grade student, so a little bit older, who had the IEP goal of communicating with her teaching teams once per quarter. So this was a great way to do it. And for each teacher report card, she gave them a blurb as to their performance. I feel like anytime you give a student the opportunity to kind of be the teacher or to even grade their teacher, they're totally going to take it.
Big hit.
So what I did with this one was I gave the student, again, the Life R checklist, and I had them pick out 8 to 10 that apply to them that they would like to have their teacher, this is from the Life R teacher, grade themselves on. So are they doing this always? Are they doing it sometimes? Or are they doing it never? And giving them between an A, a B, or a C. So doing things like, are you saying the student's name before you get their attention? Are you writing on the board with their back's face to them? Down to things like, are you pre-teaching vocabulary? Again, this is for an upper elementary student, but when you give them the opportunity and you give them the lists of things from the Life R or any other checklist that I talked about earlier, you can just highlight those and then put them in on them, and the students still interacted with it. And this also gives the teacher the opportunity, so, oh, hey, maybe I do that a lot, and that's not the most awesome thing to do, and then the teacher will then pay more attention to it and maybe catch themselves doing it. And so the bottom part here, now it's time to set a goal for yourself. So what's one thing that you would like to do better for me and my equipment? And then this is a time that I've had the student that then is becoming like the spy about it, and will make sure that the teacher's doing this and will give feedback to the teacher and praise them, or maybe say, oh, that was your goal and you didn't do that. So really getting the student interacted in with the goal and just a whole part of communicating with their teacher.
Mm-hmm. And there's a ton of ways you could tailor that to a younger kid, like you had mentioned.
And so making a teacher letter for either the beginning of the year or maybe for the end of the year, I've done with my students. So this one was a student that I did this with a 3rd grader.
Going into 4th grade, yeah.
Yes. And so I gave them an outline first.
On the right?
And on the right. And so introduce yourself, so giving your name, your grade, maybe a fun fact about you, and then giving them explicit points. So what are some things that you'd like to tell your teacher about your hearing loss? So what are some things that are hard for you? And then maybe some fun things about what you're excited about. And then even here, tell your teacher about the book or PowerPoint that you would like to share with your new class. So then the student, if you look at the completed teacher, says, during the 1st or 2nd day of school, I made a presentation that I would like to share with the class. This is what I included within my presentation. This student specifically was really all about using bullets. So she really milked this letter out. But there's definitely ways you can do something like what Lila did with her kindergartner, where they just filled in little words. Or have something like this if it's more of a 4th, 5th grader that's able to follow the guidelines and answer the questions. Or maybe you can even give them a letter with the questions and maybe add some lines to it so that the student doesn't have to, restate the question within a paragraph cohesive letter.
Mm-hmm. And I've worked with 2nd grade students who are, advanced enough or mature enough that they could handle using more of the outline framework, whereas other kids would do the more fill in the blank or use a closed set, use pictures of some kind to get through the activity. Okay, I love to do role playing. I see kids one-on-one, and I find that that's a great way to prepare them for upcoming events, and not just what's going to happen, but also what their expectations are. So what sorts of things might people ask you? What sorts of things will you need to know how to say and do? What could be some tricky listening situations in that specific situation? So examples could be going to the audiologist, prepping your equipment to go to an overnight event or to go to a pool party, or to go, even just to go to grandma's, what will you need to take care of? Even things as basic as having an assembly. I've worked with a lot of kids who are self-conscious or really shy about their equipment. And so just to say things like, okay, we're going to go to the assembly, you're going to sync in and then bring the transmitter up to the stage. The student's not, in the moment they're going to freeze and they're not going to be successful, and then a teacher will have to do it, and then it just gets ugly. Whereas if they can practice, we even go into the room where the assembly is going to be held, think about where the speaker might be standing, how can we do this subtly, and talking to the kid about what they're nervous about. Going up in front of everybody. Well, maybe we can arrange it so you're the first one there, or just taking baby steps from there. And then we also bring role playing out into the community. So with their classroom teacher, substitute teacher, new classmates, all of that, sports team members, we talk a lot about how other kids and adults, but other kids are curious and they might want to know about your hearing loss without being mean. They're not asking questions to be mean. How are you going to answer those questions?
Maybe they've never seen one before. They've never had another class with a student with a hearing aid on, or why am I talking to this microphone?
Yep. And so just how to answer basic questions like that, but also trying to learn an appropriate time and a place. The middle of a tag game is not the most appropriate time to teach about your hearing loss. But if someone's playing with a microphone, you might need to politely ask them to stop. And then in terms of going out into the community, just one specific instance of that was we discovered that our kids don't necessarily order for themselves in restaurants. They don't necessarily interact with community workers, I guess, clerks or, like I said, hostesses or things like that. Their parents did it for them. And so even though they can be some challenging, restaurants can be challenging listening environments, practicing the skills that our kids need and maybe some typical things the waitress might ask you so that you're a little bit more prepared with your answer. And also what to do in terms of an emergency. So what to do if if you get lost from your mom and you need to ask someone to help you find her, or what kinds of questions might the police officer or firefighter ask you, just to prepare them for those situations. So these ideas are some strategies that seem really basic, but I find that these are often the most helpful because I can just add whatever benchmark I'm working on.
Or if you need a fun way to answer some of those questions from the checklists and surveys.
Absolutely. So these two cuties are in kindergarten, and we are doing on a really basic sort of problem and solution. So they are allowed to hit the Post-it note with that pointer, or maybe with a fly swatter. So if you can trust your kid to keep that somewhat under control, I find that anytime kids are allowed to be physical, it's a big
My
hit.
high school student broke mine last week. Didn't even tell me. It was just snapped in half. Vocabulary review got wild.
That does get kind of crazy, high school, man. But here they were just voting whether something was okay or not okay. So is it okay to go to music and the music teacher says, today we're not going to use FM. Is that okay, not okay? And they have to pick the solution. And then that allows an opportunity to talk about what could you say or what could you do. And even if it's as basic as you come back to the classroom and tell the classroom teacher that you didn't get to use FM, and then, they're only 5 in this picture. But the other one on the right is writing on a novel surface. I had a graduate student a couple years ago show me that I could write on my table with a dry erase marker, which is a huge hit. I mean, you have to have that conversation about how you can't do this at home. But even marker boards, getting to go up to the board is a big hit. Anytime the student's writing on a novel surface, they're usually big fans. And this is just another example of the okay, not okay activity for problem solving at its most basic level. On the right here, they have to earn cards to play a game, or any game that can be played while you're learning is a huge hit. Like this ice cream game, you just spin and add the number of scoops. Whoever has the most scoops wins. So games that seem overly simple are great for one-on-one and for advocacy. So every time they answer an okay, not okay, or every time they provide a possible solution to a hypothetical problem you gave them. They get to add a scoop to their ice cream, and it's just motivating for them. The one on the right is a little more advanced, but you're just using a generic game board to create some competition. You can also break it down where, okay, if you land on a green, we're going to name something loud in your classroom. If we land on a red, we're going to talk about a solution to a problem. If we land on a yellow, we're going to talk about what you do if you don't know what's going on in the classroom because you didn't hear something. And then this student happened to be working on identifying ways that he was the same and the few ways that he's different from his peers to try to promote some identity around his hearing loss. So on the blue, we named all the ways that he is the same as his typically hearing peers.
Yeah, even I've done this a bunch of times, even with dice. So just having my
one.
sample go to it, I keep it in a sheet protector, and if you land on a 1, it's this, a 2, it's that. I actually do it a lot in high school with my vocabulary review, and if you get a 3, you have to use the vocabulary word in a pun, or make a joke out of it, or use it in a song. So there's just so many things, like if you have something like this where Lila already has it made and it's in a sheet protector that, if maybe you ended a session early, you can just bring that out.
Yep. It works great with Candyland with the different colors.
Chutes and ladders I've done it with.
Yep. And like she's saying with the dice, that's a great way to do it too because that's so portable. And if you assign points to it, so 6, or if 6 is you get to choose 1 through 5, that's a huge hit. And if you keep points right there on the sheet projector with the dry erase marker, it's just a really easy go-to, and it's so adaptable to any kid.
Okay, so you can take those games and activities that we've talked about, like earning cards to play a game and using a generic board game, or the okay, not okay game, and use these hypothetical situations. I kind of gathered a lot of the hypothetical situations that I've used and put them into one document for you guys. And so
that's in your handout.
Yes.
And I'm guessing that most of these aren't actually hypothetical, but things that actually happened to you.
No, all of them have happened. And so I would always do this with Blurt, which is funny that you put Blurt on there. So say that you have a substitute teacher in your classroom, you hand her the FM, and you show her how to wear it. She's nervous and just says, can we just wait until tomorrow until your teacher's come back? Well, what do you say to the substitute? So these are all real life things that could happen to your student. So, your hearing aid battery died in your specials class. You don't have any batteries with you. Maybe you have a station in your classroom or maybe in your cubby. So, what should you do now that you're on the other side of the school? What's the routine? And, these things can come up. And maybe if they've come up for another student, that then you can take the time to address it with that student who's maybe around the same grade that you can totally see that happening to, and that student's not maybe would know what the next steps would be. So really covers a lot. I tried to. So your hearing aids keep beeping. What should you do? Or you get home from school and you notice that you've forgotten to take off your receivers at school. What should you do?
That's a good one.
Who to talk to? Maybe where to put them away. Maybe put them in your dry aid kit right away so that you don't forget about them, so that you don't maybe take them off and then leave them at home the next day. So these are just hypothetical situations and good just conversations to have with your students. And so you answer the question and then, you take a roll or you move up the ladder, God forbid down the chute.
Oh, gosh. Another one that I've done with that one is, and I've done it with okay, not okay too, where we sort of flip the table and the student gets to be the teacher and I have to slap okay, not okay. And I've found that they get to be the teacher, so it's a hit. But it's also a chance for them to bring up situations that maybe I haven't thought of or haven't witnessed. So something that they've experienced. So, I was outside. I came in from recess and realized my receiver was gone, but I know I was going to get in trouble if I lost it. So that's more of an open-ended, okay, not okay. But that's an example of sort of a second grader who ran into that problem where he didn't want to get in trouble, so he didn't report it was missing. He just waited for the teacher to notice. So what should he have done in that situation? And one other thing I wanted to mention, if you have a kid who's maybe a little higher level, you can take that okay, not okay situation, or you can take these hypothetical situations and use a limited closed set. So for one kid, we were working on trying to solve a problem by himself. So his closed set would be a picture of him, so try to solve the problem, a picture of the teacher, talk to the teacher, and then a picture of the peace corner, quote unquote, which is a nice word for the timeout center, because what would end up happening is if asked to solve the problem himself, he would throw a fit and end up in the peace corner. So, that just takes it to the next level from okay, not okay, but it brings it down a level from the hypothetical situation, because in that instance, your hearing aid battery died. What are you going to do? You want him to pick, try to solve it myself. And then maybe if that didn't work, ask the teacher. So just another way to tailor it. That was a little bit of a tangent. Sorry about that. Oh, I love this one. So make it a challenge. This is an example of one kiddo who, I think I had mentioned an example before, needed to remember to bring his transmitter to a special. So every time he did that, he doesn't read, so the top is my attempt at a picture. If he did that, he got a star, and then we had some sort of a reward at the end. If he got to bring a friend on a Wednesday instead of a Friday, or he got to pick the last 5-minute game. We've done this on a larger scale with our in-house kids, where every kid was trying to use a repair strategy in PE. We found that our kids weren't getting the rules, and in our classrooms with teachers of the deaf, they eagerly would raise their hand to verify this. But in front of their peers, they would not. So we had a challenge to use repair strategies in our specials classes. And on the right, we have an example of sabotage, which we mentioned briefly earlier today. But in this example, this child didn't actually start hearing until she was 6, which is when she started wearing her processor. So at this point, she only had about 75 words that she could use, and I wanted to see if sabotage would work with a student with as little language as she had. So I wore my FM microphone on the pouch of my sweatshirt and started a session, and she immediately asked to fix it and to help me, and she was able to do that. So I do a lot of sabotage with my kids. They usually think it's funny, when they show up to our session and I have music playing, or I'm chewing gum, or I insist on keeping the door open to the hallway. And they think it's funny, they get to correct it, but then it allows a nice segue into talking about, well, what if you had a substitute who was chewing gum? Or what if your teacher thinks it's a good idea to play music while you work? And just provides, like I said, a nice conversation for that. I also use a lot of Barbies in my sessions, and Beanie Babies, because, and superheroes. I have a lot of kids who either don't recognize that they struggle with certain things, or they really don't want to admit it or talk about it, or they don't have that problem. So in these cases, we don't have the problem. The Barbie has the problem, or the kangaroo has the problem, and we have to help them solve it. So it takes the onus off of them, but it helps promote carryover, and it's fun. It's playful. They don't necessarily realize that they're doing work. So that's always a hit. All of my superheroes, just as a side note, all of my superheroes have hearing aids done on the backs of their ears or cochlear implants so that they look more like our kids. And then on the right is just an example, again, of my kindergartners who we modified the activities, so they had to show either a smiley face because it was a good idea, or a sad face because it was a bad idea. And they answered the same questions my big kids answered, but it was a yes or no question. So we altered the language level to meet their needs. Any final thoughts? Let's see. So these are some of our favorite resources. The Success for Kids with Hearing Loss is Karen Anderson's website. There's a lot of free stuff on there, a lot of stuff to buy too, so definitely check that out if you haven't before. Wright's Law has a lot of resources in terms of definitions, if you need research to help back you up. You were the one that showed me Oticon caps,
Yeah,
right?
so Oticon caps is a pretty big download. I would recommend putting it on your computer and not a tablet of sorts. I use it with teacher trainings, and also it can log your students' hearing loss, and you can upload their audiogram, and you can play around with it and hear what it sounds like, and it's pretty good. It's not just one of those that just kind of makes it quieter or louder within some frequencies. And there's also something that I like that I've done with when maybe a student is to bring a peer with them, is that there's classroom scenarios and there's lunchroom scenarios, and then you can add more people to the situation, and you can see how it affects the student with hearing loss. So it will say they'll be having a conversation, the two people maybe that are in the lunchroom, and then the more people that you insert into the lunchroom, it gets trickier to hear, so that they're able to have that, and it also is a good eye-opener for some teachers too as well.
Very cool. And then this is the book that we referenced earlier that everyone should have. So I guess our biggest takeaway points are always model the skill you're working on yourself, seize opportunities you see to work on things, make everything you do applicable to their everyday life, and sometimes you have to be really blatant with little kids and kids with hearing loss in terms of how they're going to apply the skill you're working on. And of course, always have fun. Did I forget anything, Ash?
Just have fun.
Just have fun. Throw in a Barbie. Here's our works cited, just in case. And obviously we're not live, so you don't have the opportunity to ask us questions. But we could maybe include our email addresses in one of your worksheets for your packet, so that if you happen to have questions about something specific we had mentioned, or a follow-up question you had, we would be happy to answer those for you. Well, I had a lot of fun today, and hopefully this webinar will be useful to you immediately, tomorrow, Monday if it's a Friday.
And you go out and buy fly swatters and tons of sheet protectors and make lots of great things that you can use with your students to spice it up a little bit.
Absolutely. Dig out your Beanie Babies and Barbie dolls, your superheroes.
Draw some hearing aids on them.
Absolutely. Have some fun, guys. Okay, take care. Thank you, everybody.